Hi everyone, so today's video is going to be a gigantic writing update, so let's jump right in with publication news. So I already made an entire video on publications that have just recently come out. First was my flash fiction story, Mama Lives in My Mouth, which came out in Young Voices 2020, I believe. You can read it for free online. I will link it in the description, and if you're in Toronto, whenever like the libraries open up and like COVID clears up, you can pick up a copy. Then my poem, We Sell Skin on Sale, came out in Augur magazine. You can pay for a digital copy, and I will link that in the description. It's just like a prose poem advertisement about someone selling skin. It is exactly what it sounds like. My poem, We Sell Skin on Sale, is nominated for the Riesling Award, so I will link information on that. Then the next thing that came out was a poem called The Drive Up Microphone at Burger King, and this came out in Carte Blanche. This is free to read online. I will link it if you'd like to. It's a pretty short poem. It's weird. And the most recent thing that came out for me is my short story, Primary Organs, which is featured in the Malahat Review, issue 213. You can either buy a physical copy, you could purchase a digital copy, or if you want to read an excerpt, I did an interview with the Malahat Review and they linked like a solid excerpt at the top. It's like the first bit of the story. So now let's jump into the beef of this writing update. So I asked you to send me a few questions, so I'll be peppering those throughout the sections. So let's first start with novels, and of course when we're starting with novels, we're going to start with Fostered. The book that I'm working on in the Fostered series is Feeding Habits, and Feeding Habits I've been writing since last April. It's currently March when I'm filming this. It is shocking to me that it's almost been a year of me writing it. Since the last time I updated you, I had just finished Lonan's point of view, so chapters 1 to 5. Since filming that video, I have written all of Harrison's point of view, so I have increased the novel at about 25,000 words. The manuscript is currently sitting at about 48,000 words, which is pretty fun. I've actually switched back into Lonan's point of view. Harrison got a few chapters. I will name the chapters since they have titles. So Harrison had 4 chapters. They were Blood Sister, Bleeding Statue, Land Mammal, and Something Held, and now I'm back in Lonan's point of view and I am writing a chapter called Swan Song. Honestly, I am feeling some type of way about this book. It has been the bane of my existence and also the love of my life. So Feeding Habits, you all know that I struggle to write this book. It is no secret that I've made many videos talking about me struggling to write this book. Even the last writing update, I talked about how much of a struggle it is to write this book. That hasn't changed. It has become very difficult. It's not actually the book that's the problem. It is me not realizing what I need. And I made an entire video on this already about why writing makes me unhappy. But I realized that I was kind of forcing myself almost to continue writing, even though I was very tired, because I thought that writing is the only thing that was like gonna bring me joy. But in reality, it would often just make me a lot more miserable because, you know, it's a pandemic. I'm very like emotionally, I think everybody is exhausted. Creatively, everybody's pretty tired. Feeding Habits was not going well for a lot of reasons. It didn't start off from a good place. I've said this before, but the only reason I started writing this book is because I was having a mental breakdown. So it started from a place of kind of like, but I'm not quitting on it, but I did have to make some changes. So I didn't want to leave Harrison's head. But when I checked the distribution of words between the points of view, Lonan and Harrison are very similar. I think Harrison might even have more. So even though Harrison has less chapters, I think he even has a little bit more words in his point of view. So I was like, okay, you know what? Writing in Harrison's point of view has been a miserable experience. I started writing it in June, and I think I just finished it in January, I think, or February even. So it's been a long time. It was about 6 months of just being trapped in his head. And so I had to make the difficult decision to get out of his head because it's just been really hard, and I'm back in Lonan's head. Unfortunately, school has really gotten in the way. I haven't had time to write Feeding Habits at all. It's kind of been a blessing though, because it's given me the much needed distance I need to also work on other stuff. Let's talk about a new Fostered project, because of course it never ends. So my sister and I have started a rewrite. It's a very casual project just for fun of Fostered Book 1. And so you all know I have no plans on publishing any of these Fostered books, including this rewrite. So one of you asked, how is the Fostered #1 rewrite been going? And Of the Red Earth is just a rewrite of the first book, but kind of different. There is a pandemic, because at this point I am writing CNF. Basically, Of the Red Earth is following Reeve again. We're back in Fostered #1, but we're bringing some of Fostered 2's elements. There's a cult in Fostered 2. We're bringing it back in, but now it's called Adam, and that's where the name of the book comes from, because that's like the meaning of the name Adam. It is a blood drinking cult, and we're going to be focusing, I think, this book around it. I don't even think we're going to get that far. Sarah and I are really just like drafting the first chapter for fun. And so the first chapter is so far going pretty good. I started rewriting it after a few weeks. We've been working on it on and off since like late 2020. I started rewriting it in past tense because I just can't write in first person present tense. Pretty happy with how the opening is going. We haven't nearly finished it. It's really only the first 2 scenes of the first chapter that have been going, but I'm really liking it in past tense. And as you guys know, I don't write young adult anymore, so it's been a lot of fun to first of all write genre, so it's dystopian, and second of all write YA. So this brings us to the first part of letting go in this series, and that is letting go of Houses with Teeth. And so Houses with Teeth was book 7 of the original Fostered series, and I basically have already made up my mind on this, that I don't think I'm ever going to continue the main series. I think it's done where it is, and it doesn't need to continue. It ended with book 6, which is Rewired. It's personally not where I would have wanted emotionally and like sentimentally to leave the series, but that's just where it ended up. I finished that book in 2019 when I was in grade 12. I had started just really getting into my writing style as a literary writer. Fostered and literary fiction were not fully meshing, and so it was a bit of growing pains. Then I started writing Mothwork, which isn't quite literary. It is like kind of genre-y with like a lot of literary elements. And then I started writing Feeding Habits, and Feeding Habits is literary fiction, I would say. It's been really hard to understand where Houses with Teeth now fits in my writing roster, because originally I was going to just kind of write it how I'd written all of the other Fostered books. It's still kind of dystopian, but it's a bit literary, and so there's some of the old elements, but I just realized I don't really like writing Fostered in that way. And so when I was in university last year, in my first year, I had decided that I would write it kind of like a regular old literary fiction book. This year, I realized that me choosing to write Feeding Habits, so Feeding Habits was never supposed to happen. Mothwork was supposed to be a standalone spin-off, but I basically didn't want to write Houses with Teeth so bad that I created an alternate spin-off. I deflected from writing this book for so long because it made me really uncomfortable to have to write with these old characters and write them in a different story. Like, it didn't make me feel comfortable. It was a really hard thing for me to grasp, because I was like, I want to continue writing with these characters for sentimental reasons, but I don't really want to keep writing with them for actual like writing purposes. I don't think I would enjoy that. I don't think I'm unfortunately going to write in Reeve's point of view ever again. I think her story's done. I am shelving that project. I noticed like when I was writing with like the old characters, but in this like new kind of more contemporary like literary scene, it just didn't work. It just felt wrong. Like, I wouldn't have written with them if I was going to write this book. I would have written with other characters. I'm kind of making it a goal to write a novel that is not Fostered this summer. I've been writing Fostered for so long, since I was 13, and I've been writing exclusively Fostered since I was about 15. The last book that I wrote that was not Fostered was I'm Disappointed, and I drafted and finished I'm Disappointed when I was 14. I have not written like a novel outside of Fostered in so long, and I think it's time. And, you know, it's not that I'm saying like, oh, it's time for me to grow up and I need to give away the projects that I love. But no, I think it's just time to just start writing other things. Something in my gut is telling me that Mothwork 3 might be the last Fostered novel ever. It's been really hard for me, and I'm getting emotional about it, because this series like means a lot to me, and so it's really hard to think about it ending. I didn't think like, and I don't want to project into the future, because obviously I said that Fostered would end after 1 book, and now it has 6 books and like 3 spin-offs. So I just I like never thought that I would like see the day where like I was thinking I'm like gonna finish the series, like, and I'm not gonna work on it, and like work with these characters. It's a bit hard for me to handle, honestly. And I'm not going to force myself to stop writing it. Like if I really need it, because also fostered is just something that means a lot to my mental health. Now let's get into some questions because I'm done crying. Are you planning on writing a novel you want to publish? And if so, why are you not writing it now? Mothwork is my 11th novel and is my 11th novel that I'm not going to be publishing. And so I'm thinking that the next one that I want to work on is one that I would like to be of publishable quality. Why am I not writing it now? School is really hard, and I think focusing on a book where it needs to be a book would be really difficult anyway. I'm not even writing feeding habits right now. Why are you currently focusing on a comfort project you don't want to publish? I made an entire video on this. It's called Why I'm Not Publishing My Books or whatever. I will link it. I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with writing a comfort project rather than something you want to publish. I think that that is your choice as a writer. It just makes me feel better to do that, and I have other things that I'm pursuing to publish. The next question is, are you waiting till after the craziness of college and are for the moment holding on to a comfort story? No, me writing fostered is not because I need the comfort during university. I've just been writing fostered my whole adolescent life, and now I'm done adolescence. Like, I'm turning 20 soon, and so it's just something that's been intrinsic to my life. I've been wanting to talk about this for a long time. Authortube particularly, I think even the online writing community, but to me, I don't know, short fiction writers, you pipe up on this, I think has a obsession with publishing only novels and only valuing those who publish novels rather than valuing those who publish other things. We still see them as novices if they're publishing short fiction and poetry, but then wouldn't that be not true for actual writers who have careers in writing just short fiction or just poetry? I definitely am publishing other things, but I'm not looking to publish a novel at the moment. And that doesn't mean that I'm like a novice writer or whatever. How have you been able to stick with the same character/story for so long? I struggle with keeping with my passion projects because I'll postpone working on them and fall out of love with them in the process. I just love them. I've been working on them for so long that it feels unnatural to not be writing with the fostered characters at some point. I don't think that that is particularly a great thing for me, because it does make moving on like even harder, but you know, it happens. So if you are struggling to stick with characters, it's okay. Like, you don't have to stick to a passion project. Like, if your passion's not there, then you don't have to stick to the project because you've called it your passion project. It's fine. You can have multiple passion projects at once. It's totally fine. And passion projects don't even have to be finished. The next part of this video is going to be talking about poetry. So I apparently have written so much poetry. So I've written A Burial, and A Burial is a prose poem about a woman who's like burying something and then she meets a fox. Are You Worried and Depressed, which is a found poem. And we have Call Me From the Smoke Alarm, which is a rewrite of a poem that I wrote years ago called Rubber Band Gods in 40-Degree Weather. And I rewrote it just so I could send it to a publication I have on campus. I can't really remember actually at all what the current version is about. I remember what the original is about, but I don't know what the current version is about. And I have Family Recipe, and this is like a really short, like 4-line poem about my family. It is not very good. I need to edit it or like scrap it. It's not a good poem. Then I have If We Grew Up, which is a poem that I'm sending to my workshop this week. This is about my best friend and I was feeling really emo about it. Obviously, it's a pandemic. I haven't seen her in a really long time. I miss her. So I just wrote a poem about her and I. Then I wrote a poem called Lifesaver. I actually don't remember what this poem is about. I think this one might be about body image. Then I wrote Methods of Planting Tartberry Seeds, which is a prose poem, and this one's really personal to me, and I really like it. I just need to find a home for it because I think it is really good. And then the next poem I wrote is My Body in the Mirror of a Gas Station Water Bottle. Then the next poem I wrote was Orca's Coffin Birth Kills a Man, 2002. I talked about this, I think, in my yearly wrap-up video. This is narrated by an orca whale who has unfortunately passed away and gave a coffin birth, and she's testifying for why she is innocent in the death of a man. But I really like this one. I really hope that it gets published because it's one of my favorites. I recently wrote Psychiatry in Downtown Toronto. This is a prose poem. It was for a prose poem assignment. This one is pretty personal to me. It's based off of some actual experiences. The next one that I wrote was Spot the Difference. This one is a really intense poem about like an abusive relationship. It's pretty short. Then the next poem is The Drive-Up Microphone at Burger King. I wrote this one a while ago. Like I said, it was published. Then the next poem is The Last Time I Screamed I Said Water. I wrote this one in 5 minutes because I was procrastinating doing an exam. Like, I was supposed to be writing the exam, but then I was like, no, I am just going to write a poem. This one was originally the name of a chapbook that I was going to write, and then I realized like none of my poems fit under that theme. Then I wrote a poem called Elegy for the Good Daughter, and then after I wrote We Drink, and then I wrote We Sell Skin on Sale. Those are the ones that I remember, so I've certainly been writing a lot of poetry recently. I have to usually hand in poems every week for my poetry class. Sometimes it's every other week, depending on how many we have in the roster left, because that's how my prof runs the workshop. Let's move on to the short story section of this writing update. Announcement: I am officially writing a short story collection. It is in my bio, my official bio. So, that's how you know it's official. It's in my bio. And the short story collection is called She Is Also Dead. It is a line from one of my short stories, which I will get to. And I have not actually talked about this on any of my social media. So I wrote a really rough summary for She Is Also Dead, which is probably going to change because there are tons of short stories in this collection that I will have to, swap out. But the summary for now is: in She Is Also Dead, a small town turns murderous when their local invasive species, the Janices, begin dying. A child analyzes the dead body for her mother from the driveway of her neighbor's house. A live-in designer treads life like a phantom. A young woman is hired to photograph a cult ritual at her former childhood home. In the secluded community of the Gates, a young girl prepares catering services for the funeral of a girl rumored to be killed by a wolf antelope. A brother and sister argue about whether they should exorcise the ghost of their mother out of their shared home. And two young women held in captivity prepare a celebratory breakfast after murdering their captor. These stories follow women as they navigate the tumult of womanhood, death, subservience, and independence. So those are just a few themes, and those are just a few stories. Since then, I've written a lot more stories that I would actually probably put in the summary, but that is my rough summary for now that I wrote like a few months ago. So let's get started talking about the stories that I've written recently since my last update. Again, these stories are not in order. I can't remember the orders particularly well, but I wrote a story called Blink Twice for Final Judgment. I wrote this one back in the summer, I think in August, and this one is about the woman who goes back to her childhood home and is invited to be a photographer for this ritual called Sundown. And so it's a lot of fun. It's my cult story. It's currently at a magazine. I haven't really been submitting this one that much though because it's really long. So the next story is Fabergé, which is 619 words. It's a flash fiction piece and it's currently at a magazine. It's only at one magazine. It's been there for a long time. Then I wrote a story called Fig, and this one's also flash fiction. It's 947 words and it's polished. A really interesting story. It is the story like that is in the summary about two girls who are being held captive. The day after they murder their captor, they have this celebratory breakfast. Then I wrote a story called How to Spell Alpaca, which is 1327 words-ish, and it's mid-revisions. I'm just sort of fleshing out psychology at this point, but the story itself is on the page. So this story is about a middle-aged woman who meets a young mother, Violet, and Violet's daughter, Blanca, at a petting zoo, and then the narrator interrogates what it means to be a mother herself. This is the start of my subtle fiction phase. Lately, I've been really into writing subtle fiction, which I will sort of get to in this conversation. So I also wrote a story called Joanne, I'll Pray For You. This was previously a story called NYC in Your Apartment, but I wrote that story in 2019, so I had a contest I wanted to submit this to, and so I looked at the story, and with the help of my sister, we really deleted the whole thing except for the core of the story. So it's really just like the middle of the story that is now Joanne, I'll Pray For You. I really like this one. This is probably one of my favorite short stories I've ever written, and it's pretty short now. It's only 1,800 words, which is really submittable. It used to be over 5,000 words. So then I want to talk about a story called Phantom Limbs. So I have a vlog of me writing it. I finished writing it in the summer, but I started writing it about like a year prior. It took me a long time to finish it. It's about 4,800 words. Then I wrote a story recently. This is my most recent write called Protect the Young. That's a really loose title. It's probably not going to stay that way just because it doesn't work. But that one's about 4,000-ish words. It's about to be workshopped. I submitted it. It's going to be read by my classmates today, and then I will be workshopped next week. So this one is about a young mother whose daughter is suspected of murdering her father, and she moves to a farmhouse with her daughter. Her daughter, who's only 18, gets married the same day a whole bunch of chickens get slaughtered, and that brings back up the memories of the narrator's dead husband, Arnold, and, you know, what actually happened. So this is one of my favorite stories I've written. I already know that I have to make revisions because right now it's not fully there. It doesn't really seem fully realistic. So I already know changes that I'm going to make. If you didn't know this about me, I listen to upwards of 4 hours of true crime cases pieces a day. I listen to a lot of true crime. It is why my screen time is so high on my phone. It was only time that I wrote a true crime story, and what came about the story is I thought that I had to submit my story a week earlier to workshop, but I was actually wrong. But that's how frazzled I am in the pandemic. So I think I wrote it on the Tuesday thinking I had to submit it on the Friday. And I was kind of panicking that day because I didn't have an idea for a short story. By then I'd written so many short stories, guys. I have a goal to write a short story a month this year. And so I have been killing that goal. January, I think I wrote 3 stories. February, I had already written like another story, and then I had to write another one. So I've been like short storied out. I've been writing short stories really consistently. And so I didn't have an idea for this one. Of course, I took a shower and I got an idea. I literally hopped out of the shower, literally dripped all over my phone with my wet hands. And I wrote down this idea about this girl gets married and there's like a murder. And so I really like how this story turned out. Again, there are edits that I need to make. I wrote a short story also called Shark Swimming. This is like a little over 900 words. It's flash fiction. I've submitted it to a few magazines, but it just keeps getting rejected. I think I've submitted it to 3 magazines and all 3 rejected it. I got some good edits from an editor from one of the magazines. The story is about a young woman who recently broke up with her girlfriend, and to cope with that, she goes to Australia to go swim with some sharks. Then she starts interrogating the relationship. It's pretty short. It just takes place in the lobby of this shark swimming place. I actually had to write the story as like a test workshop piece. It came out of the title. I've been wanting to use the title Shark Swimming for a long time. Then the next story I want to talk about is Slaughter the Animal. I wrote this one, I think, in July. It's about 4,000 words. It's very polished now. It went through a workshop. Revising this one was just difficult. But at this point, I think it's pretty polished, and I think I'll be getting my grade back soon from my professor, which is really awesome, and then I'll start submitting it. Then I wrote a story called The Party, and this is about 2,300 words. It's polished, I would say, and it's at a contest right now. I wrote this story in days. I read some writing advice from a writing craft book that I'm reading, like Wild Mind, Living the Writer's Life. And it was basically like, don't take your hand off the keyboard, just keep writing it. And that's something I learned when I was in my first year. My professor was like, even if you just have to like doodle or write the same letter, just don't stop writing. And basically I took that advice to heart, and that's how the story came out to be. The Party is about a woman who moves to a new house and receives an invitation that is addressed to the previous homeowner, but she RSVPs anyway and attends the party. She's newly divorced and she's struggling to deal with that divorce, and so she's hoping that she can find some sort of coping, I guess, in this party, and wild shit happens. And I will say, I think this is my favorite short story that I've ever written. I think right now it's at my #1. So I'm really hoping that, you know, something happens with it because I really like this story. And then the last story that's on my list, this is so out of order, is The Wolf Antelope Will Not Come For Us. This one's about 1,500 words. It's polished and it's at like 12,000 different magazines. I'm so sorry to the magazines, but basically I submitted this at the end of my semester in December, and it was the first thing I'd submitted in a long time, so I got carried away. I haven't heard back from anybody yet about it. I think it's gotten rejected once so far, but I think that it was a personalized rejection, so hopefully that means somebody will pick it up. So I want to answer some of your questions. How do you know when a piece is done? How do you know which one is the one? I don't. It's really just, you have to stop editing it at some point. It's really like, do I want to edit this again? And if the answer is no, then the piece is done and I'm going to submit it. If it keeps getting rejected and I think that there's something wrong with the story, I'll go back and look at it. Usually, like, if I'm not sure if a work is done, I'm like, do I want this work in magazines? If the answer is no, then I know it's not done. The next question is, do you have any tips for making a contemporary piece feel less mundane and more interesting / engaging? I loved subtlety lately. Lots of the short stories I've written have taught me the power of subtlety, and I think where I learned this power is from this short story collection called How to Pronounce Knife by Sue Van Kam Themavangsha. She won the Giller Prize with that short story collection for a reason. It is a beast of subtle writing. To me, it taught me a lot about the power of realism and the power of simplicity. There's something that hits different when you write a subtle, like, quote unquote, nothing happens story and it's successful. A lot of the pieces I've been writing that are subtle have been narrated by like 40-year-old women, like How to Spell Alpaca, The Party, and Protect the Young. So those are all like more of my subtler, really grounded, realistic works. And I've been really enjoying writing them lately. You have to give the characters interesting qualities. Obviously, for a story like Protect the Young, the interesting quality about one of the characters is she's probably a murderer, the daughter, and then the mother is interesting because she's almost like in denial the whole time. And then we have the party, and what's interesting about her is that she RSVPs based off someone else's invitation, and she has this really low self-esteem about herself, and so there's a lot to work with in terms of psychology. So if you're struggling with making mundane ideas interesting, really look at character psychology, because character psychology can really manifest and carry an entire story. You don't even need anything to happen if you have interesting characters. Again, short stories are really just moments that are caught, and so whatever way you capture it is what the short story is going to be. So now I wanted to talk about my writing degree, just because that's a part of my writing life now. My writing degree has been going very, very pandemically. You don't get as much out of it when it's online. To be fair, my writing degree really relies on in-person communication, and so I don't think it's really conducive to online learning, even though the profs are like trying their best. So I had some questions about like my academic life that I wanted to answer. So how does your academic writing assist or harm the development of your personal writing? If we're talking about like academic writing, like essay writing, it harms it because I hate academic writing. But if we're talking about academic, because I go to school for creative writing, writing that I am writing for my academic life doesn't harm my personal writing, because I don't view writing for school as writing for school. I view it as writing for personal and just taking it as seriously as I would take a story that I would write personally for myself. Sometimes you have to separate these things and be like, this is also an assignment. So there are things that you have to consider when you're a writing major. So all the short stories that I wrote, I'm very happy that I wrote them, but it has taken away time from my personal project, which is Feeding Habits. It just takes away time. It's impossible to write a novel during a semester when you're a writing major, like your own novel. You need to focus on like the poems that you have to write, the short stories you have to write, but I still find just as much gratification in writing for school. Do you think deadlines help jumpstart creativity? I do think that it does. For example, with Protect the Young, the deadline, I work really well under pressure. I need a little bit of pressure to create some of my best stuff. It really does help me do it. Like sometimes I don't want to write a poem, but I have to, and surprisingly, I will get a good poem out of it. That doesn't always work. Sometimes I'll write a poem and it's just not good because I was forced to write it because I had to hand it in. It really does help though to create constantly though because of the deadlines. I find it's helpful for me. As a writer, what are your career goals after your degree? How do you reconcile the broke artist aspect of writing with the idea of writing just for yourself? Career goals is actually something that has changed a lot for me in this pandemic. Originally, during the semester, I'm on track to get an English degree. I've just been taking a lot of English electives because my writing degree requires me to take a lot of electives, and I didn't want to take sociology electives, basically. So the first half of the semester, I was like, oh my God, okay, let me just get a double major because I really want to be like a high school teacher. My whole life I've wanted to be a teacher, but then I also wanted to go to university for creative writing, and you can't do that. You can't be a teacher with a BFA in creative writing. I have not seen one teacher's college here that will take creative writing like as an actual teachable, even if they teach creative writing classes in high schools. So unfortunately, I just kind of said goodbye to my teaching aspirations. But this year, because I'm on track to get my degree, I was like, okay, maybe I'll do a double major. And I was pretty set on it. I was going to declare it. I already declared my writing major, but I was going to declare it. But then, I don't know, guys, something recently has happened called the pandemic where I really want to get my MFA in writing. I was not ever going to go get my master's. I didn't think it was worth it. I didn't think that I needed to do that. I just didn't want to. But now I really want to get my master's in creative writing. And I'm feeling a passion for teaching creative writing, perhaps. I don't know. So if I get my master's, obviously that opens up another career path of teaching creative writing at university. Am I going to do it? I don't know. I do think I'm going to apply to MFA programs and just see what happens. But whenever I graduate, that's farther into the future. But my career goals have definitely changed a little bit. I might still get the double major in English just in case I'm like 50 and like I need like a job. The only money that I'm making right now in the pandemic is from YouTube, and I only get a paycheck like once every other month because I don't make that much money off of YouTube and publications. So there's definitely a lot to think about with career because I obviously can't have a job right now, and the pandemic Toronto is locked down. So I did have a job and then now I don't have a job. So, you know, it's kind of difficult to balance the career, especially when we're thinking about it in terms of the pandemic. How do you reconcile the broke artist aspect of writing with the idea of just writing for yourself? I've never really considered this because I don't like to hinge my creative work on money. I have a video on this, like I mentioned, about capitalism and art. And some people have to do that because the only way that they're making money, kind of like myself, I have to think about the money in the YouTube sometimes because it's the only way I'm making money. I definitely understand that kind of tension. I just try not to focus too much on it, but sometimes I understand that it really can start meddling with creative work. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think Kate Kavanaugh recently uploaded a good video kind of interrogating this question. I will link it in the description because she has really great stuff to say, and there's also really good conversation in the comments over there. All right, so my camera battery died, so I had to take a quick lunch break. So I'm back without earrings, lipstick, and I have coffee. So let's continue with the questions. How do you deal with feedback from classmates who might not be the intended audience for the piece you're workshopping? One thing I found during my English degree was that many peers and profs didn't read speculative fiction of the kind many of us were writing. It often felt that the class would spin their wheels on some stories without offering much substantial feedback, especially if the instructor had particularly strong opinions about popular fiction. Have you experienced any similar difficulties? How do you balance your own creative impulses with the expectations of instructors? Yes, I think I have had this experience, but it's actually the opposite. My program is historically a literary program, but newer professors have been loosening, I think, the reins on literary fiction in my program. I am also obviously coming from a literary background. So I found the opposite, that I've had a little bit of trouble as a literary writer applying like genre feedback because we haven't learned genre technique. I don't want to do a disservice to my classmates who are writing genre fiction by not keeping in mind their genre conventions, but it's impossible for everybody in the class to know everything about everybody's genre. So I understand completely where this person is coming from. And I'm really sorry if in your class, if you were writing speculative fiction, like your prof looked down upon you for that. I don't think that that is right at all. Like I said, I don't think that one has more merit than the other, and it's not fair to treat fiction in that way. How do you balance your own creative impulses with the expectations of instructors? It's really, really hard because if, you know, the asker's experience, it seemed like they weren't having a great response with submitting genre fiction. I haven't had, obviously, pushback from submitting literary fiction. It's really balancing your grade versus your story. And for me, like I said before, my school stories and my stories are the same thing. And so it can be really difficult to bring those things together and reconcile. What do you want to do? Do you want to get a better grade, or do you want to write the story that you want to? You can do both. You can submit what maybe the expectation of your professor is and then do what you would want to after. But, you know, that also calls into question, like, how useful is that for a degree? And so I do think that that's unfortunate if profs and students don't have conversations about these kinds of things, especially if your prof is being hostile about writing genre. I don't think that that's fair. Most of my class writes like speculative. I think everybody has had similar like grounding in their stories, and so it hasn't been that much of a problem this term, but I can totally see how that would be a problem. Can you talk a bit about your editing process? Is there a certain method you use, i.e. changing formats to reread your work / highlighting, etc.? Do you have certain things you know to look out for? I always overuse the word that, for example. I don't print out my work. I know a lot of people use hard copies. I've actually printed out my work a lot of times. I don't find it helpful to edit on printed copies. I have talked about my short story editing process in a video before. Basically what it goes down to is I reread like my short stories, and this also goes for chapters. I'll reread them. Then I will sort of take note, like make a list of things that I know need to be changed. Maybe then after I finish the reread, I will think about how I can make those changes. And then on the second pass, one by one, I will make those changes until they're done. Then I'll read it again, see if there are more changes, list them down, continue until I get to a draft that I feel could be submittable, for example. What do I have to look out for? Usually in my drafts, just underdevelopment of complex ideas. Sometimes I have complex cores to my story that are often buried a little bit in the subtext. I mentioned that I love writing in subtext, and so sometimes the subtext really just needs to be text. How do you decide when a novel / story is ready to write? Is there a specific moment that occurs to you that makes you feel like you have all you need to start drafting the new work in progress? No, I'm a pantser, so basically how I know a story is ready to write is when it comes to me, like strikes me down like lightning, and I write it. Something happened to your laptop and all your writing files got corrupted. You have a one-time option to save only one document. Said document could be any novel, any short story, any poem, etc. Which one would you save? Okay, I have loopholes for this because I would not save any of the fostered books because they're all printed out, so I wouldn't have to worry too much about losing the data on that. I don't have moth work, but I have sent it to people, and so it is backed up in other places, like on the internet, so I could still access it. Feeding Habits is backed up on Dropbox. All of my work is backed up, so basically this wouldn't really, this situation, if I'm using all the loopholes, wouldn't bother me. But I would probably save Feeding Habits. Okay, let's take away the loophole. I think for the sake of my sanity, I would probably keep book 3 of Fostered. Obviously, my short stories would be a better choice. Because I can make money off of those. Have you ever had any misconceptions about the writing craft / literary fiction? If so, what were they? I think that you can't do genre stuff in literary. Currently in my subtlety phase. Obviously that doesn't really count for me right now, but that's probably the biggest one that I thought, like, you can't write outside of contemporary stuff. You definitely can. Literary fiction doesn't care about what you write. You can write whatever you want. Next question is pivotal moments / stories in finding your writing style. So I will do this for both like actual other books that inspired me, but also for my own work. A pivotal moment for when I found my writing style, obviously, is when I read The Girls by Emma Cline. The Girls by Emma Cline is a really fantastic book. Every time I go to reread it, I just can't get over the discrepancy that it is the exact history of what happened in the Manson cult. Like, if you read it and you're familiar, like, with that case, it's not gonna, you're probably gonna be like, oh, I don't know about this. But the writing is really beautiful in that book. Demigods by Elijah Robertson is my favorite book, I think, of all time. But The Girls by Emma Cline, very much influential on my writing style. I read it 3 years ago in 2018, around this time. I had just begun getting a bit more into my literary style, but then when I read The Girls, the prose clicked something in me, and I wrote this scene where Harrison and this other character that I don't talk about on here, her name is Emily, they're in his room. There's this really beautiful description of Emily, and Reeve is like watching them like from the doorway, because she did that a lot in the Fostered book. She would just spy on people, and there's this description of Emily that really is my first moment of being like, this is my writing style. And from then I haven't stopped writing in that style. I mean, obviously I was writing like that before I read The Girls by Emma Cline, but something about that book, I think that's something I should clear up. It's not that I read The Girls by Emma Cline and was like, I'm just gonna copy Emma Cline's style. That is not how I created my writing style, and that is not how I recommend you create your writing style. Everybody's writing is their own, and plagiarism is not okay. Taking inspiration from Emma Cline, I was very inspired by what she did with language and how she uses language, how she constructs things, and so that struck a chord in me when I was 16. I'd been writing that way my whole life and for the last year and a half or so, but then reading the book made me realize, oh, like, this is what I've been writing this whole time. Now I understand.
Hello. Basically my camera died before I could film an outro for this video, so I recorded one on my phone, but I am a dummy and deleted it, so this is the outro for this video. Thanks for watching, you are the best. Sorry for this robot voice, but I made sure to choose my fave Microsoft robot. Her name is Zira. Goodbye from me and Zira.